Today we're going to make a dining table out of Tigerwood. Hi, Ben here from Homemade Modder. Now I know we've been experimenting with a lot of big projects and some that involve things like 3D printers and CNC machines. But for this project, our friends at RYOBI challenged us to see what we could make using just 3 power tools. So this entire project was made using just their circular saw, cordless drill, and orbital sander. So take a look. I considered 3 types of tropical hardwood for this project: Garapa, Tigerwood, and Kumaru. I really like the dramatic grain on the Tigerwood, and so I bought some 1-inch thick by 5.5-inch wide deck boards from Advantage Lumber. I used my circular saw and speed square to cut pieces for the legs. I'll post drawings with measurements on my website. Whenever you cut pieces of a tropical hardwood, it's always a good idea to seal the end grain with some paste wax. This keeps the boards from drying out too fast and reduces the chance of them potentially cracking. I took the boards that I cut for the legs, measured in 1.5 inches from either end, and then drew a diagonal line between those 2 marks. I clamped the boards down to a piece of rigid foam, which is a great way to hold pieces steady while you're cutting through them. I used my circular saw just to cut along the diagonal line that I drew. I cut some shorter pieces that I'm going to use as brackets to help support the legs, and I did the same thing. I measured in from the ends, drew a diagonal line, and then split these boards into 2 triangular shaped pieces. This time though, I made an additional angled cut by measuring in from the end and then drawing a diagonal line. I then used the first piece to mark the lines on the other pieces. I then held the brackets and the legs down to a flat surface and then drew a line that I'm going to use to trim the legs with. I repeated this process for all 4 legs. I used these leg pieces to set the angle on my circular saw before ripping one of the deck boards in half. I set the blade back to 90 degrees before ripping another piece in 2. I took the pieces that I cut at an angle and then glued them together with the angled cuts aligned. I want to be able to use this table outdoors, so I made sure to use TiteBond Type 3, which is a waterproof wood glue. The factory edges of these deck boards had a slight round over, so we used our orbital sander to match that on all the pieces that we had cut for the legs. I used some 2x4s and scrap pieces of the deck boards to hold the legs in the right place while I glued them together. Now I was pretty confident in the cuts that I made, so I just lined up the edges, but if you want, you could make a jig on a piece of plywood that would ensure that all the angles of the legs are the same. By now the glue had cured on the doubled up angled pieces, so I trimmed them to length. These angled pieces are going to be supports in between the legs. I used some duct tape to hold a 3-inch wide strip of the deck board in place, and then glued and screwed it to the angled piece. Tigerwood is an incredibly dense wood, and it's important to pre-drill all your holes before screwing. I added some steel right angle brackets to either side of this support piece. I positioned the legs on either side and marked the locations of the holes through the angle brackets. I pre-drilled holes through the legs and then realized I was going to have kind of a hard time driving in the screws since there wasn't enough clearance for my drill. So got this handy flex adapter, and with a little bit of help from Jesse to hold the legs in place, we then drove in the screws. We added additional screws through the 3-inch wide strip that went into the legs themselves. Now we wanted to give ourselves plenty of area to connect to the tabletop, so we added an additional 2.5-inch wide strip between the brackets. Now these are some of the few screws that are going to be showing from the outside, so we use some nice stainless steel screws with a star head. A countersink bit is a great way to drill out the wood so that the screw head can sit nice and flush. Now that we knew that all the pieces would fit together nicely, we went back, added some glue, and then reassembled the whole thing. The boards for the tabletop were a little bit warped in both directions, so I got some stainless steel bolts and clipped off the heads using some wire cutters. I then screwed on 2 stainless steel nuts into the middle of this threaded rod. Bolt cutters make this a little bit easier. I used some scrap pieces of plywood to make a jig that'll help me align holes right into the center of the edges of the deck boards. And now I have a nice easy way to use these little pieces of stainless steel to keep the boards aligned. I started by drilling holes along either end of the tabletop. We then did a quick test fit and drew a line down the middle that we'll use to align our jig so we can put in a middle set of these stainless steel bolts. We used some clamps to help force all the boards in place. But they were still bowing out a little bit, so we used some scrap 2x4s and some C-clamps to force them all nice and flat. I then used 3/4 inch long screws to add in some steel mending plates that'll hold the boards nice and flat while I add in the legs. These mending plates reduced most of the warpage, but there is still a little bit of turn down around the edges. But don't worry, that'll get flattened out when I screw on the legs. The leg assemblies fit around and hide the mending plates from the outside. I then pre-drilled holes and added some finished screws through the underside and into the tabletop. I added additional supports between the legs that I secured with stainless steel screws. I used a 30-inch long board to mark lines along the legs, flipped the table over on its side, and then used my circular saw to trim all the legs to length. I added some additional stainless steel screws through the outside. Now the dust from tropical hardwoods is often way more toxic than domestic woods, so I took some extra precautions while doing the finish sanding. I wore an RZ mask, which is a highly effective filtration system that is also more comfortable than a typical disposable mask. And I used this handy cordless vacuum that plugs right into my RYOBI sander. I wiped off all the dust and then cleaned the wood with some acetone. I finished the table with some teak oil, which is specially formulated for dense tropical hardwoods like this. Tropical hardwood decking like this stands up to the elements quite well, so you could use this table either inside or out. For more information, check out our website, and if you want to see what we're working on next, be sure to follow us on Instagram. Oh yeah, and the table's super strong. Check out some of our other projects, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Thanks! Bye!